Tick. The cheap quartz clock on the mantel keeps its tiny honest beat, a microsecond of certainty sliced into a world that has otherwise dissolved into suggestion. I watch the second hand like a man watching a cough. It goes where it always goes, it doesn't have to decide. There is comfort in that. There is also terror. 1 hour left, they say, though that phrase is useless the way a stopped watch is useless. It gives time a number and a face, and then expects everything to bend itself to that measurement. But the phrase is not a schedule. It is a kind of myth, a sounding bell that refracts into a dozen different meanings depending how you stand under it. For some it's currency, 1 hour to close a deal, 1 hour to confess, 1 hour to reach across a bed to someone who has been not quite distant for years. For me it is a geometry of the mind, 1 hour left until I must reconcile two versions of myself that have been living in different rooms. That I learned to divide myself into rooms in college, where the lights were always wrong and every conversation smelled faintly of beer and the things you did to prove you were alive. There was the version of me who believed in plans, neat lists, punctuality, the sacrament of calendars, and the version who preferred to wait, to see if the world would fold itself in a more interesting way if I didn't press it. The planner would set the coffee cup down carefully and schedule the argument. The waiter would leave the cup where it was and let the argument echo into something stranger. They could coexist for a while. They could also war has a sound. Not the shattering you see in movies, but a clamor inside your skull as decisions stack like plates. Each plate asks for a different dinner. When you're young you don't notice because your plates are thin, light. When you're older they are iron, and you can feel the clink in your bones. 1 hour left, the plates gather. You recognize the sound because you have been here before, in smaller ways. The late paper at university. The argument you let wait until the morning, which did not vanish but hardened into something else. The lover you left in a taxi because the compromise seemed more terrifying than the leaving. People talk about deadlines like villains. They come from nowhere and smack you across the face. Deadlines are not villains, they are cartographers. Give a place a boundary and the landscape reveals itself. Give your hour a boundary and the person inside your head becomes visible, the coward, the brave, the liar, the honest one. That's what the bell means to me. Not an ending. A revelation that it is 2 in the morning and the city below the window is a scatter of insects. The lights blink into imaginary constellations, the kind of constellations city planners never intended. I pour whiskey like a ritual, another kind of clock. The liquid that tumbles time into a tumbler, and listen for the house to answer. The house is a patient animal. It holds memories in the seams, the child scribble under the stair, the scorch mark on the counter, the vacant space on the wall where a portrait used to hang. The house keeps its own hours. It remembers the way people leave, hurried, regretful, finally indifferent, there is a knock. Soft. Not the cruel hammer that would have been dramatic, but a careful, uncertain knock, like someone scratching a page to see if it's real. It is 3 knocks exactly, the number that once meant safety in childhood games and later meant nothing at all. I do not move at first. The rooms inside me argue. The waiter says, "Ignore it, let it go." The planner says, "Answer." We are a committee of ghosts and the clock doesn't care for committees. When I open the door there is no one there. Just a scrap of paper taped to the wood with damp tape, curling at the corners like a lost leaf. The paper reads, 1 hour left. No signature. It sits at eye level like a joke the house can no longer hide from. I bring the paper inside and hold it up to the light the way men hold up photographs of suspects. The letters were typed, perhaps printed, perhaps written in that precise, expressionless hand of whoever decides these things. They might have been written by me. That's the ridiculous thought, the kind of paranoia that is flattering in small doses, the idea that the deepest self has found a neat, practical way to communicate threat through paper. It's vanity to think the universe is personal, but also comfortable. So I sit. The mantel clock keeps its confident tiny beat. I set the paper on the table between the ashtray and the drink and stare. What do I do? Lie the hour? Waste the hour with petty reconciliations? Burn the paper and pretend there was never a bell? Each option has theater. Reality is less grand. The hour is a mirror and the only directions are inward. I know, in the way you know that breath is moving, that there are things I must do. There are conversations that have been postponed long enough to gather their own climate, the call to the mother I haven't spoken to since the funeral because words feel like they will slide into grief. The apology to the friend who accused me of disappearing the day I needed him most, the voicemail to someone else that I have been rehearsing for months. The planner writes them on the back of an envelope. The waiter folds the envelope into himself and hides it in a drawer, but there are other things. There is the secret I have been burying with the gentleness of a coward, the confession that the life I built was partly a construction, an imitation of who I wanted to be. People congratulate you on accomplishment and you nod and inside you count the scaffolding. The scaffolding is useful, it keeps me from collapsing. But scaffolding is also a stage, and tonight the stage is being dismantled bead by bead. An hour is not long if you measure it by errands. It is a lifetime if you measure it by the gravity of what you will admit. So I decide to use it the only way I can. I will speak. Not to anyone else first, to myself. That seems ridiculous. We talk to ourselves every day. We mutter lists, bargain with our appetites, remind ourselves to pick up milk. But there is a difference between that and a facing, naming the truth you have been working around like a mole. This will be an hour of excavation that I press record on a device that lives in the drawer like a primitive relic. No one will listen unless I send it. No one will listen unless I make it loud enough to wake them. That's the trick with apologies and confessions and the kind of sentences that require receivers. You must make them impossible to ignore if you hope to be honest. You must make them inconvenient. The first words come like a cough. They are rusty and unfairly human. If you are listening to this, it means either that I was brave enough to send it or brave enough to stay. I laugh at my own sentence because it sounds like a radio play, and because bravery is often theater, lit from the wrong angle it becomes performance. I tell myself to be less theatrical. The voice obeys, lowering, which is perhaps the only true modesty left to a man who knows how to lie beautifully. That I begin with chronology, because chronology is a liar that helps you feel in control. I tell how I came to the house, what I do for a living, the small and dull facts that make people believe you are organized and therefore moral. But within minutes the chronology dissolves. Memory has the peculiar habit of refusing modularity. One recollection slides into another until the past is a Mobius strip you can only traverse by accident. I find myself recounting a train ride 3 years ago. A woman sat across from me and read a book my sister would have loved. I remember the pattern of her scarf and the way she closed the book gently, with a careful domesticity that seemed to hold the rest of her life together. Later that afternoon I stole her parking place. That petty theft stands now as a thing that complicated no one and yet sits in this monologue like a pebble in the shoe, insignificant but impossible to ignore. Why tell a thief story? Because the mind refuses to be tidy. The hour asks for full account. The human brain will supply evidence in arbitrary denominations. So I speak of small crimes and larger ones, of the time I promised I would never leave and then left, of the time I said I loved someone and meant only the safety of the phrase, of the time I watched a child drown for the length of one breath and did not shout because shouting is demanding and I was tired. That I pause and the recorder takes the silence like a sponge. Silence in a microphone is not a lack. It is an accusation wearing patience like a costume. That is when the other voice appears, the one that answers me. Not literally, there's no one in the room but me, but another tone in my chest. Older and steadier, who offers commentary. You always hedge the worst into metaphor, it says, which is true. I hedge because shame is a garden I know how to fence. If I make it poetic, I can argue it is art and therefore not culpable. The hour, I realize, is teaching me about the taxonomy of cowardice. There are the easily seen lies, betrayals, punches thrown in anger. And then there are the subtler ones, the acts of omission, the times you permitted yourself to be unavailable because presence is hard, the acts of inattention, the allocations of time that reflect your priorities more honestly than any confession could. You tell someone you will be there and then frog march through obligations like a bureaucrat. Each absence becomes a small fossil. There is also a humor in it, because human beings are efficient in self-deception. We will manufacture reasons for our failures that sound plausible and then use those reasons as blankets. You will hear people say, "I couldn't because I had to take care of myself." Of course, sometimes it is true, self-care is not a villain, but sometimes it is a clever costume for fear. We apply it liberally, like cologne. Half an hour in, the clock calls its tiny ticks as if to remind me that allegories do not reset physical time. I decide to call someone. Of all the things you can do with a countdown, reaching out is among the more dangerous. It introduces other people into the geometry of the hour. It insists you be accountable to a witness. I picked the mother first because the mother is a map most of us carry. You return to it again and again, measuring distances and mistakes. Her voice on the phone is an old radio station, a wave I have been tuning out. When we speak, the years fall into place.